guys, I'm Sarah Douglas. I'm the publicity chair for the SPJ here. We're super excited to have you all here and to have Lisa Colangelo. Throughout the event, you're more than welcome and you're encouraged to use our hashtag #HobartRealityCheck to ask questions that Dr. Hirshon will then ask. We'll put them up on the screen, so any questions you have, and if you're too afraid to use a microphone, just tweet it to us with the hashtag. We also want to mention that we are having a movie night on October 25th. It's going to be outdoor. The location is not yet determined, but we'll let you guys know, and we'll be showing Spotlight. So definitely think about coming out to that, and now we can get started. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Sarah. So thank you and welcome to everybody. My name is Nick Hirshon. I'm an assistant professor of communication here at William Patterson. And this is the second event in our Reality Check speaker series, which is hosted by, as Sarah said, a group of students who's looking to form a Society of the Professional Journalist chapter here on campus. So definitely stay up to date with all of our happenings. We have a Twitter account, WPSPJ. We have also on Instagram. So if you follow along tonight using Hobart Reality Check, Sarah mentioned, sometime in the middle of our discussion, I will just put some of your tweets up there and I can ask Lisa, so that'll be great. And I just, before we start, want to thank Jacqueline Antonacci, Sarah, and Rod Holliday, who are backstage right now curating all of the tweets and making sure all of our tech is great and our mics. So thank you to them. And now I'll introduce you to our guest. Lisa Colangelo is a veteran journalist with bylines in some of the most prominent news publications in the New York metro area. She was born and raised in Queens, New York, and she began her journalism career at a weekly newspaper named the Queens Tribune, which is based in Flushing. From 1989 to 1992, she worked at the North Jersey Herald and News, a daily newspaper in Passaic, where she covered Little Falls, Totowa, Clifton, Patterson, and West Patterson, which is now known as Woodland Park. In 1992, she moved to Pennsylvania and worked at the Bucks County Bureau of the Philadelphia Inquirer during a period of rapid growth in the suburbs. Lisa next headed to the Asbury Park Press from 1993 to 1999, where she covered several towns in Monmouth County and the State House in Trenton during the administration of Governor Christine Todd Whitman. In 1999, she moved to the New York Daily News, one of the highest circulation newspapers in the country. And for 7 years, she worked out of the City Hall Bureau, covering the administrations of Mayor Rudy Giuliani and then Michael Bloomberg. In 2005, she took over the Daily News' civil service column, writing about city workers and contracts. And then she went to the Queens Bureau, where I met her, and she covered local politics, features, and breaking news. She is now a staff writer for amNewYork, which is a daily commuter newspaper based in New York City. So please join me in welcoming Lisa Colangelo to William Patterson. So thank you,
Thank
Lisa.
you.
So a lot of things I want to discuss with you tonight, but first, again, since we are in a room full of journalism students, and you're no stranger to talking to journalism classes, we want to give them this reality check, this kind of behind-the-scenes look at the news industry. But before we get to that, just starting out in college, you went to Queens College, part of the City University of New York. What kind of things did you do while you were in college to prepare for a journalism career?
Well, everybody in this room is already like ahead of where I was in college, because I went to Queens College and I wanted to stay in New York City, but they didn't have a journalism program. But I actually really had a good time there, so I didn't want to transfer out. So what I focused on was I worked at the paper. I eventually became editor of the paper, which is a fun, crazy, thankless, but a really good experience. I did internships whenever I could during the summer or sometimes during the year. Like I did one at the Columbia Journalism Review. I did one at NBC TV. You know, I kind of grabbed what I could because, again, it was the 80s. It was a really different time. Like, you have a lot more opportunities than I did because, you know, sort of there's a fortunate and unfortunate part of news organizations kind of scaling back. Back then, there were very big staffs, a lot of unions, a lot of places where people stayed for, 20, 30, 40 years. Things are a lot more flexible and mobile. So I just grabbed whatever internships I could, did everything I could, and then started looking for jobs when I was still in school. So I think if you have people like, do I call you Dr. Hirshon? That is so strange for me still. Really, having somebody like Dr. Hirshon is great because not only is he connected, has worked in the field. I mean, I had a newspaper writing professor who had never worked at a newspaper. And he couldn't stand me because I think, I couldn't believe he was a little arrogant and he'd never worked in the newspaper. I mean, the fact that you have people here who can guide you is great. So you're already 10 steps ahead of where I was. And, when I graduated in 1987,
Well, and then in 1989, you went to work for the New Jersey Herald and News, and you were reporting in this area generally.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually pretty cool driving here. I got to relive my 1989 commute from Queens to Passaic. I actually worked, though, more in the Passaic Valley area. We had reporters covering Wayne. Wayne was a very big area to cover, and what I remember about Wayne was just like endless floods, like horrible floods always in Wayne. But yeah, it was weird. It was tough for me to leave New York City because anybody who's grown up there, a lot of people don't want to leave. But it was really the best thing that ever happened because New York City people, we tend to be provincial in our own way. So by coming out here, covering towns I had never even heard of. I mean, obviously I knew Clifton, Patterson, but Little Falls, West Patterson, which is now Woodland Park, and Totowa. And those weren't easy places to cover. I had to go every day to the municipal headquarters, and they didn't want anything to do with me. And I used to just have to go every day, anything going on, going to all the town council meetings. But that's really good training, and it really teaches you the basics of municipal government. That'll help you whatever you do next, wherever you work. And and I liked North Jersey. I had an aunt and cousins in Montclair and Morristown. So it wasn't all that, far in an area, even though, I had to kind of learn it in a different way as a reporter. And it was just, back then it was called the North Jersey Herald News, and it was not owned by the Record. And now Gannett, I think, gobbled up everything in New Jersey, but it was a very different time then. So we were very competitive with the Bergen Record. They had a Passaic bureau here in Wayne, and it was a very large one at the time. So we were very, I would get up and go grab the Record in the morning to make sure I wasn't beat. Although I lived in Bergen County, so I had to drive like a lunatic to Passaic County to get that edition to make sure I wasn't beat every morning. It was before the internet. That's how old I am. So.
Well, I was actually, since you mentioned the internet, I was going to ask you about something. Since your career has spanned that from the pre-Twitter days to now, and just an incident I was talking to my students about today with Twitter. So you've recently developed a strong Twitter presence. You have more than almost 4,000 followers on Twitter, and I want to get your opinion on how the news media covers breaking news stories in this day and age, because on Monday afternoon, you may have seen a lot of major news outlets were reporting prematurely that the singer Tom Petty had died. And the confusion apparently started when the Los Angeles Police Department erroneously reported it. Then CBS followed up on it, Variety, and then all these other lemmings news organizations started retweeting the same thing. So you're left in these delicate situations as a reporter. And so I want to know, what do you do in these situations where, you think that you have a story, but you're not quite sure, and you want to get it out fast because you want to beat the competition, but you also need to be accurate?
I think about that a lot. That's a really good question. I think social media, even though it didn't even exist when I started out, I think it's great. I think Twitter, more than anything else, that is where you will get breaking news, whereas years ago it was the wires or something else, or if you're very local, listening to the police scanner. But yes, it has made it even easier for people to jump ahead before they get all the facts. I think it kind of depends a little bit where you work. Mm-hmm. Where I work now, amNewYork is owned by Newsday. I don't know if a lot of you know Newsday. It's a very large paper out in Long Island. And they are very careful about everything. I mean, I've come from a very competitive New York City tabloid market where they're, they're careful too, but Newsday really, they don't care so much about being first. They don't ever want to be wrong. So I think that was a disaster, and it was kind of sad what happened. And, it really goes back to the police department, and I don't know what happened there that they did that, if it was one person's mistake, if they really had. I'm a little surprised. So I would just always, I think it's really more important to be accurate than to be first, mm-hmm. but you will be under tremendous pressure, especially now, to be first with everything. So. It's really up to your editors, and maybe someday you'll be one of those editors making that decision. But Yeah.
Yeah, one of the other things that you can give them insight about is, I was saying before how you covered the mayoral administrations of Rudy Giuliani and Michael Bloomberg, who were both known for at times having difficult relationships with reporters. Giuliani sometimes viewed as very arrogant, Bloomberg as very condescending to reporters. So how did you try to develop relationships with them or the people around them when they have that kind of a difficult persona?
Well, I mean, I think it depends. When you work in room 9 in New York City Hall, you're sort of embedded, right? So you're with them all the time, and you're going with them to events. You're with their staff. It has, positive side and a negative side. So, I mean, Giuliani was different because Mayor Giuliani, he was not as accessible, right? Coming off, I guess, Mayor Dinkins and then Mayor Koch before that, who Mayor Koch would hold press conferences anywhere. Giuliani would speak anywhere all the time, so you had to follow him and really monitor what he was saying, because even if he went to something that didn't have a Q&A, he might say something. So I followed him everywhere, but he was not somebody you could approach when he was going up and down the steps of City Hall. I remember that. Whereas Bloomberg, we'd be sitting on the steps of City Hall. If he was in a good mood, he'd take the phone out of your ear and talk to your mother, and my mother loved that. And he could be really more down to earth than people gave him credit for. Giuliani and I sort of connected a little bit on baseball, because I was a Mets fan and he was a Yankees fan. So we had that sort of going back and forth a little bit. I think all you can do is sort of, be fair. Be accurate. Like Bloomberg once was really annoyed about a headline on one of my stories and just started yelling at me, and one of his staffers started pulling him away. And I'm like, I didn't write the headline. And he's like, well, your name's on it. And it was not I didn't take it personally, because he was still understanding. He had come from a business world. A lot of people don't know, how journalism works, how decisions are made. We don't even know, in the morning what's going to be coming out. So, I remember that, but it didn't, and they'd get annoyed at you when you wrote stories you didn't like. But if in general, it always balanced out. And especially being at the New York Daily News, that was a paper they needed to maintain a relationship with. So that helped too.
Well, and we focus also a lot on maintaining relationships with the person who is the mayor. But how about with their aides? Because I remember hearing a story once about a reporter who developed a very good relationship, not only with the head coach at a major university, but the secretary at the head coach's office. So on the day the head coach was being fired and it was national news, no one would give any information. But because he had developed this relationship with the secretary, she hinted to him oh, he's being fired right now. And so because of that, paying attention to someone who usually doesn't get that attention, they end up getting a big scoop.
I tend to do that anyway. I tend to talk to the cleaning people, talk to the secretaries, talk to the aides. I'm always, you always want to be polite. You don't want to, be obviously sucking up to people, because that's distasteful. But I think a lot of people are, don't really pay attention to other people. So if you always just say hello, how's it going? I think there's a way to kind of build a relationship and sort of keep that professional distance too. I just think it's just being yourself and always kind of trying to be professional and be polite, no matter what the situation is.
And right before we started, you were saying that you were part of the team covering September 11 for the Daily News. This was not long after you started in the City Hall Bureau. So, we had Sarah Armagon here last time talking about covering hurricanes and the devastation, the trauma that people are going through as you're trying to get information from them, interview sources. What are your memories of reporting on September 11?
To be told, there were people there, when the buildings came down. The buildings came down. This all happened 8:30 in the morning. There's usually no reporters around at that time, and it was also primary day. So I was sort of stuck in Queens. So when we first heard a plane was, we just thought it was a small plane. It was an accident. We didn't have it. And by the time everybody knew what was going on, they shut down the subways. And I remember feeling very frustrated I couldn't get into Manhattan. So they sent me and my colleague Paul Shin, who also lived in Queens, to Elmhurst Hospital, because they just assumed there would be tons of people to evacuate. And that's one of the most horrible things. There was no one to evacuate, Sure, there were people in hospitals immediately, but for the most part, it wasn't this mass evacuation to the outer boroughs. So as soon as the subways opened, I made it back into the city. At that point, the whole area was really cordoned off, and everybody was at the police academy in Lower Manhattan. And that's where the mayor was. That's where they had moved City Hall, because nobody could go to City Hall because it was so close to the towers. And I was there. They made me sleep there. Even though nobody else was there, they made me sleep there. There was a very emotional press conference there that night. You know, the governor of New Jersey was there. It was Don DeFrancesco at that point, right? And and then the next day, there was sort of this like weird lottery about who was going to go with Mayor Giuliani down to the site. And I was one of the reporters in the pool that went. And there's video of that I still can't find. But what's very interesting, I do remember the mayor yelling at me to put my mask on. You know, and we were just walking around the perimeter, and all you could see were just piles. It was overwhelming. And then after that, they set up City Hall at one of the piers. And one of the things that we did every day was Mayor Giuliani was bringing different people from all over the country down to see the cleanup. And some people didn't understand why he did that. The reason he did that was because New York was asking for a lot of federal money. And as you know, not everybody really loves New York and New Jersey from other parts of the country. But once they came down and saw that, you know, members of Congress, other officials, they couldn't sort of deny the devastation that had taken place. So you know, and then we had so many reporters covering like every piece of this, but I was always sort of the part of the team attached to the mayor and the city council. So whatever they did, wherever they went, I went along. So.
How do you deal with those moments in reporting that where, you know, I assume you're interviewing survivors and people who just went through it, and you have a human compassion that you want to maybe hug somebody or hold them because you see the devastations going on, but yet we're supposed to be neutral, objective reporters. How did you?
I mean, 9/11, you know, it wasn't until later that you talk to families, and that I feel like that was almost just such a different dynamic than if you're at a house fire or a murder or any of those other things where you're at you know, I had a friend once and I didn't agree with that when, you know, one of the things you have to do as a reporter is door knock on the houses of people who've been, you know, relatives of people who've been killed or whatever. And she would bring flowers. Where did she work? Maybe it was down south. And I know some people have done that. I would never feel comfortable doing that. I think, you know, you just show your respect. You say, I'm really sorry. But sometimes people really want to talk, you know, and they want people to know who this person is. I think you just have to find that mix of professionalism and compassion, and you just don't, you can be kind and be open without getting overly involved and sobbing, and I don't know how else to describe it. I guess it's really a case-by-case situation, right? I mean, if you're at a fire where somebody, ooh, scary camera. Sorry, I heard a click and I was like, oh no. I'm sorry. I am so used to being there. Being in front of a camera is like just terrifying to
She
me,
was so devastated, all the tweets that were going out today.
Oh my God. I was like, are they at least getting extra credit for these tweets?
That I was writing.
So overhyped. I should have known the overhype was you.
Yeah.
But sorry about that. I don't mean to. So I think every situation's different. Like speaking to 9/11 survivors, it's mostly like family members. I'm trying to remember. I mean, again, I was a politics reporter at that point, so there were people probably doing more victims. I do know some of the people who had to constantly cover the victims got really burned out and stressed out from that. If that was like all they did. I mean, I was a City Hall reporter at that point, so, you know, I was a little bit removed from that. But I just think there's ways to do it without being kind, showing some compassion. But I also have been on scenes where some of these TV reporters, you know, cry along with people, and it just feels weird, and it doesn't seem sincere, not to be snotty, but
Right, it's gotten a lot of attention in recent years.
Yeah, I just have, everything's a balancing act.
Sure. And I want to get to some of the tweet questions in a second. Before we do that, just one
Yes, please,
more
lots
thing.
of questions.
And prepare, if you have questions, remember, hashtag Hobart Reality Check. It's fine for you to tweet during this event. But a few years after September 11th, in 2005, you began writing the civil service column for the Daily News. And you're the first columnist that we've had visit as part of this series. So there are some unique elements of column writing that I want to go over with you. also especially since you were a columnist at the same time you were also a reporter. So a columnist is usually someone who injects a lot of opinion into what they're writing, and they're encouraged to do that, whereas a reporter is told, don't do any of that. So there's that issue. But I know that civil service especially was important to you because your father, Salvatore Colangelo, was a World War II veteran who worked as a teenager for the sanitation department, helped start the mayor's office of labor relations. And you used to talk a lot when we were colleagues about how he was a bureaucrat in the days when bureaucrat meant a positive thing, not like, oh, just a paper pusher who gets political preference or something. But so how did you go about writing the civil service column, making sure that you're doing it in an objective way that wouldn't harm your relationships with other sources, but you did want to give some analysis?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was lucky in the sense that it was easy to keep that division there because it was really more, it wasn't an opinion column, it was more a column that focused on contracts, features, and other things focused on civil servants, right? So police officers, firefighters, teachers, sanitation workers. I did a lot of analysis on like contracts. I got great sources through that column too, because a lot of people, especially in sanitation, feel like you don't, they only get negative press. Nobody ever really sees what they do, and there's so much that goes on. And at that point in news, I think back in like the 70s and 80s, you had these really thick newspapers that just wrote about everything, and there were so many stories. As time's gone on, also the appetite for those kinds of human interest stories has there's not a lot of space in the papers anymore. So civil service gave me a chance to do human interest features, analyze municipal contracts, which is kind of what my dad did, which was cool because when I was growing up, everybody's father had and mother, my mom worked too. My mom was a social worker, psychotherapist. That was easier to explain. Everybody else's father, had a very well-defined job. And I would be like, my dad works at the Mayor's Office of Labor Relations, and people would be like, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know. So it was very cool to go work in City Hall all those years later, and finally understood what he did. But anyway, so I think I never really felt, because the column was a news column. Mm-hmm. It wasn't an opinion column. It really was a news column. But sure, when you think of columnists, those kind of columnists, you'll see that sometimes with political bureau chiefs. They'll do a column, but they'll also cover politics. That, I think, is a really dicey line. I don't know how they do that. Right. And I've seen that in papers, too. But I felt like the lines were, pretty, easily drawn there.
Yeah, it happens a lot in sports writing, too,
Yeah,
where you'll
probably.
have a columnist, calling for the firing of a coach, and meanwhile they have to
Exactly.
interview that coach later that day. So it sets up a weird dynamic. But anyway, let's see if we can get some of the tweets. And look, they're very quick to
Oh
put
my
them up
God,
there. How great are
okay.
they?
Wow,
So,
yay, questions. Because really, like any reporter that wants to sit in front of you and talk about themselves a lot is like creepy. So, there's people who I probably have good war stories and I'm not great at that, but I love answering questions. So
okay.
Oh no, the favorite story. I wish I knew. One day I will be able to answer that because I've been a reporter now. This is my 30th year. Okay, one of my favorite interviews. Well, okay. Does everybody know who Jane Goodall is? She was kind of a big deal when I was a kid. Very famous primatologist. And I am not like impressed by anybody, as Dr. Hirshon will tell you. But I had a chance to go talk to her a few weeks ago, and she's this incredible woman who at the age of like 18, I think, just went into the forests of Africa, had to have her mother go with her, and just like lived with chimpanzees, did all this incredible work, was able to go and get her. She's just one of these conservationists, somebody I've heard about since I was a child. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, I hope she's not a jerk, right? Because it would be so sad when you interview people. And I met her in this hotel room, and she has something very serene and very British and, about her. But she was very warm, very nice, so smart, so easy to talk to. But who else? If you want to talk about in the celebrity world, I just started covering Comic-Con last year. I don't know if we have any Marvel geeks here. But we're big Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans in my house, at least me and my daughter. So we got to interview, and my daughter got to interview, Clark Gregg and, the cast of that show. Who else? You probably can remember better than I can celebrities, right?
I mean, mostly you never.
I mean, does John McEnroe a celebrity? I don't know.
Tennis player John
I
McEnroe.
know.
Sure,
I
he
mean,
counts.
that's sort of.
You interviewed some athletes too, right? You interviewed Mets players.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm trying to think of other. I mean, celebrities would come to City Hall and we'd talk to them briefly.
Did you ever interview Clinton or Trump?
No. I mean, we saw Clinton at City Hall, and people, the women who worked in City Hall, not the reporters, they like screamed like he was a rock star. I'll never forget that, like screamed. It was like, I was like looking around. But I had covered, actually, this is something I forgot, before the years of, I remember people thinking like, you have to capture this moment. And I always like never want to make a big deal of anything, but I was in the Oval Office when they signed Megan's Law.
Mm-hmm.
It was 1995, I think. Because I was working then at the New Jersey State House, you know, and covering that. That was sex offender registration law. I'll think of more, I promise. I'm sure there's, I mean, I'm sure I've talked to, you know.
Many famous people. Yeah, but we have other questions we can get to.
Here we go.
Let's see. Juliet asked, do you feel like you need a certain type of personality to be a journalist?
You know, I think that you need journalists with lots of different personalities, right? I mean, you have very brash people who need to be like more aggressive. You need a little more laid back people who don't get, you know, as upset about everything. I mean, think of all the different things you do in reporting and journalism, right? You have to cover breaking news, so you have to knock on doors, you have to get rejected a lot, you have people yelling at you, chasing you, screaming at you, threatening you. So you have to have a certain constitution to do that. You need, or though you have investigative people, and that's somebody who really needs to be able to sit down and analyze, you know, data and be able to, you know, have a lot of patience digging. So I think you need I think any personality can fit in journalism. It's just a matter of what you focus on. You need a lot of different people with a lot of different kinds of skills.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Juwan says, is there hesitance in how you interview mayors considering it could strain your media relations with your paper?
That's a good question. That's interesting. I'm not sure. I feel like, you know, back when I was in City Hall, we had like 5 people. We had a lot of people. And everybody had a different relationship. Like, I had a very good friend, and I always felt like they made him the boogeyman, right? I won't mention names. You probably know who I'm talking about. And the administrations would always get kind of angry with him, and they kind of focused all their anger on him. Mm-hmm. Again, it's a balancing act. I mean, really, my fear was never with the people I covered. The fear is always like your editor on the other line. Like, that's who you really need to serve, and that's who, you know, so if somebody's, you know, if it's between telling your editor, oh, there's no one home, and knocking on the door one more time, you'll knock on the door one more time. You know, if you have a story to tell about, you know, a mayor, I mean, that kind of coverage is really heavily controlled anyway. So the editors will know if you're going to write something that's going to, like, shut down, like, they'll just shut you down for a few days and not give you any stories and turn around and give the New York Post and the New York Times stories to spite you. I mean, that happens, or used to happen. In the police bureau, it'll happen in City Hall. Mm-hmm. So no, you have to do your job. You have to do your job in conjunction with your editor, so you're all on the same page. And they know that if there's a certain story, if they go ahead, it'll cause them grief. You know, they help make that decision.
Mm-hmm. All right.
If that answers.
Yeah, let's see. Well, Jack asked if you've worked with any William Patterson alums before, but I guess you might not know that.
I'm not sure.
If any of your colleagues or even anyone you
Maybe
interviewed.
when I was in New Jersey. It's possible. I worked in New Jersey for a really long time, for, you know, almost 10 years. So
Right.
it's very possible.
Yeah. Lindsay, if you could warn your younger self about one, this is a good one. Oh my
Oh,
God!
that's
And you did a lot of bad
really
things.
good one. Oh,
Yeah,
boy.
if you could, and I've heard a lot of these stories of what you did when you were younger. So what would you warn
Wait,
yourself?
what would I avoid? I mean, maybe I'd be a little kinder to myself, although, you know, that kind of fear that drives you early on is good too. Maybe relax a little more. I don't want to tell you to relax. It's a really competitive business. You have to really be on top of everything. But maybe kind of take a step back. I know, especially when I was working here in North Jersey, it was just like a grind. You got up, you know, you went to bed, you went to work, you hung out with the same people you worked with. It was hard to kind of take a breath and sort of see what you're doing and step back from the day-to-day so you could see bigger stories that way and bigger pictures and what's going on, if that answers.
Sure. You can't see all on the side, but Maynard asks, Maynard, who's the president of our SPJ chapter, how do you prepare for an interview and how should a student prepare?
That's good. All these questions are good. I'm so excited to get questions. Research. There's like, especially now that you have the internet, as opposed to like the old dusty clip files we used to have, you have so much at your fingertips. You know, all these different newspapers, like good news sources. Don't go to like ridiculous news sources. You know, documents, anything. Before you interview somebody, do as much research as you can, just so you feel better and you feel prepared. You're not going to know everything, but, you know, you should know who you're talking to, what they've done. You can think up some questions in advance. And again, doing background research is so, you know, it's really, so many materials are so accessible to you now. So I would take the time, I mean, you know, depending on what kind of interview it is, but just really try to take the time to prepare and do your research.
Sure. Let's see, is there anybody new we have? Ziza asks, how long does it take you to write a story and how do you deal with writer's block?
Oh boy, chocolate, maybe. It depends on the story, right? Like if you have to bang out a very quick, and it depends where you work. I mean, I've worked so many places that have different, like we worked together in the Queens Bureau of the Daily News. So we had much different, we had earlier deadlines, somewhat more relaxed deadlines than when you're in the main office and you're writing something that needs to go up online right away and they're screaming at you every 5 minutes. So, and they do, make no mistake. So I think it depends. I think if I've done the research, I can bang something out pretty quickly in like, you know, half hour, less. I mean, if it's 6 inches, 10 inches, 20 inches. Right. A longer story where I've done a lot of research, I'll take, if I have the opportunity, I'll take my time. I'll use some of my own time at home if I want to spend more time on it. But definitely, yes, get up and walk around. If you have writer's block, if you get stressed, and just don't stare at a screen that long anyway, go out and grab a soda, you know, go visit. Yeah, I shouldn't encourage people to eat poorly. But, I mean, just go outside and take a walk. I mean, get away from your computer for a new minute. He never left his computer, and I would yell at him all the time because our bureau chief, who was an old friend of mine, was a very disciplined, very strict guy. And, you know, and I just feel like you can't sit at a computer all the time. You have to get out and talk to people, or you have to at least go out and grab lunch, you know, just because you'll go insane that way. So.
Right. I mean, I think it depends on the kind of stories you're
Yeah,
reporting,
exactly.
right? But that was one of my fears when I started as a reporter is how do I go from like a college atmosphere where I have a few weeks to write a story to they give you a set of facts and that you just have to get this information. They literally tell you on the phone, like, I need it in 2 minutes. I need it in like 3 minutes. We need to get this up. And now with the web, it's even faster.
I know. And that still stresses me out and annoys me because there's been times where I can bang something out right away, but I want to try to reach somebody, right? I mean, I don't want to just rewrite something that either someone else has written or off a Facebook page. I want to try to reach the person on that Facebook page. That takes a little more time. And some editors don't care. They just want something up right away, you know, because someone else will post it right away. So in those cases, put something up right away and then keep researching and see if you can keep updating the story. It is it's a tough balancing act.
Sure. Let's see. Glenn, would you say that working in journalism helps you in other fields of communication, and how so?
I would think, because so many reporters that we know go on to become spokespeople for agencies, PR for large firms. I mean, they know how to write, they know how to communicate with people, they know how news organizations work, so it gives them, you know, there's always this, I think some people, and I always tell people don't be judgmental because people move out of news and into PR for different reasons. But that's why so many people in the public relations field will go for journalists, former reporters, because they know they have all of those skills that they need.
I just love this question because you're going to give a really entertaining answer.
Which
interview was the biggest pain for you
Oh
from
my
Jack?
gosh.
What?
Do you remember one? I'm trying to remember.
That was your most painful?
Oh.
Well, I mean, we had a lot of weird people call the Daily News who you probably had to interview, right? Like community activists who are very angry at you about something that you...
I mean, you mean people calling up and just yelling at me? I mean, that happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
Certain state senator who felt like I wasn't giving him enough attention because he was running for borough president. You know who I'm talking about. Oh my gosh, hard time. I remember...
You've had a few awkward... I know you told me stories of like awkward interviews.
Oh, I remember in New Jersey, I had to call this judge on the phone, and he was so arrogant. He was so nasty. It was awful. And he's like, you don't know what you're talking about. And I guess maybe I fumpered a little bit, or maybe it was a subject that... but he was... Most people aren't like that. That was horrible. In terms of like a sit-down interview at like... Oh, well, this is funny. So... in New York City, we had this really, actually very brilliant health commissioner, Tom Frieden. And he was the one that was behind the smoking ban, which Mayor Bloomberg, got a lot of grief for, but then ended up being like one of the best things that the city did. Trans fat ban, like all sorts of he was a very, very brilliant scientist, doctor. Very forward-thinking, progressive thinking, but boy, was he buttoned down. And one day when he had just started, I was there with a New York One reporter, and we were both going to interview him. And I think maybe she was interviewing him first, and it was a room like this, so quiet. So I take a piece of gum, I'm trying to get it out of the bubble pack, and he's like, can you stop that? Can you stop that? Like just the wrestling of the gum was like unnerving him, and it just like, it was... he was very, I could never get him to, even when his son was around once, I could never let him get him to let down his guard ever interviewing him. He was very smart, very focused, but he was a tough one. But I had a lot of respect for him. I don't know. I'm sure, I mean, any of the people that, you have to interview sometimes and they get, local people, they can get very difficult. And all you do is you keep asking them the question. If they don't want to answer, they don't want to answer. And just say, I'm writing this story. You can be quoted, or we could say that you don't, you had no comment, and then we move on, but I'm calling you to give you, that opportunity.
Right. I remember we had a lot of people maybe who were upset with the political viewpoints of the Daily News editorial board. So they would take it out on us and say like, oh, you're anti-Israel or too pro-Israel, or you're too anti-abortion or pro-abortion, and it'd be like, I have no idea what they wrote about that. That's separate from me.
That's easy, because I would just be like, we don't write that. We're news reporters. You can go complain to somebody else about that.
Yeah, so we'd get that before. Let's see. They keep changing. Let's get Jessica in, because she asked a few. What was the most exciting, fascinating topic for you to write about?
Ooh. I mean, it changes all the time, right? I mean, right now I'm psyched to go to Comic-Con tomorrow. I really am, because I've had mostly a career with very hard news. So to be able to do more features, entertainment writing is exciting. I liked covering political campaigns. I mean, that's kind of crazy, but it's also a lot of fun. I think being able to sort of dig in when I was in New Jersey, and I never thought I would like this topic, I was able to do some in-depth reporting on mental health issues and plans to close and cut down psychiatric hospitals. And at first, when they said to me, oh, you'll cover Marlborough and the closing of the psychiatric hospital, I'm like, what? I don't know anything about this, what? And I just really had a very deep interest in that. Anything with animals, that's always fun. Talk about people calling you up and screaming at you, like, you remember this. I mean, animal people, and I consider myself sort of one of them, but they can be very, very difficult to deal with. But anything that sort of brings to light animal cruelty or helps get animals adopted is fun. What else? So many things. I mean, that's why I never became an editor. I'm like, as a reporter, you get to do something new all the time, or every year you get to switch your beats. You get to write about different things all the time. So it gives you an opportunity to learn.
Professor Burge asked something about how did you get 4,000 followers on Twitter, and what advice can you give to those who are trying to grow their feeds? I
think it goes through spurts, right? I think a lot of those came when I was covering politics, because political reporters just, they get a lot of traction, a lot. So I think I got a big burst in that when I was covering politics. And then just, I try to tweet a lot when I can. I wish I was a little more aggressive at trying to get followers. I think it's sort of when you're covering something that a lot of people are interested in, when you're at a scene. You know, if you're at a breaking news scene and people want to follow you, you know, they'll, you know, just tweet early and often pictures, just be a presence on Twitter, and then people will want to follow you.
Do you do a lot of like live tweeting when you cover events, or do you wait to do it till after?
No, I try to do what I can when I can right away, like something, even if it's just a picture, even if it's, I just feel like, especially with Twitter, you just have to be out there constantly.
And we'll get some of the others. I just remember one that you said that students ask you a lot is, how do you balance being a mother and, you know, having a marriage and relationships and being a reporter?
I mean, that's a tough question because I didn't get married and have my daughter until my early 40s. So I think by that point, I was really willing to put things on hold a little more. I mean, that was when I met you, because I actually, after I had my daughter, I asked to go back to the Queens Bureau. I had been in City Hall for 7 years, and I knew I couldn't keep that pace up with an infant. It's tougher for people who are younger, but I see people doing it. You know, you just have to. My friend Maggie Haberman, who's a great political reporter, has 3 children. You just have, there's sacrifices, but she's an amazing mom. You just have to be very present. It's not really the quantity of time that you're together, it's the quality, right? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes I'm with my daughter a lot. My husband works nights. And I'll be like, you know, so cranky. And I'll be like, sometimes maybe she'd be better off if I worked more. Like now with my new job, I don't get home until late. So, you know, she's like, Mommy, I missed you so much. And I'm like, yeah, but, you know, maybe when we were together more, I was more cranky. So it's sort of a, it's a balancing act. But I think you can do it. You have to have support, or you have to pay for support, right? So you need good child care. I mean, I don't have family around that can help. So you have to have child care and after-school programs and things like that. But I definitely felt my last few months at the news, when they needed me to do more breaking stuff, they were so nice about it. But I was the only person. I had to be like, you know, I have to get my kid from after school at 6 o'clock. And it's hard to keep saying that sometimes. So what I'm doing now is more news features, and it's a lot more flexible.
So essentially, because I think a lot of students ask you that question thinking, do I have to give up my social life or a marriage or anything like that in order to be a successful reporter? And the answer is no.
It also depends what you want to do, right? I mean, if you want to be at every breaking news story, if you want to cover a political campaign, you know, yeah, there's sacrifices. I mean, it's worth it, and it's good to do it when you're younger, which is kind of what I did. But it depends what, you know, there's different, I think when I was younger, I felt like I had to do this 24/7 for 10 years, but, excuse me, it doesn't have to be that way. It's definitely a commitment, though, but you can, you know, figure it out.
Yeah. So let's
Oh,
see.
memories from the APP?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh, a lot.
So what are your memories?
Oh, my goodness. All right, so my first assignment was in the Freehold Bureau, and Bruce Springsteen's from Freehold, and I'm the only Asbury Park Press person who was not a Springsteen fan, so that was interesting. I have nothing against him, I just wasn't a fan. And they used to go crazy, I remember, anything Bruce Springsteen. But, you know, I loved living at the shore, covering the shore. A lot of my time I spent in Trenton, actually, so even though I worked at the Asbury Park Press, I was in Trenton and that part of New Jersey for 3 years, 4 years maybe. It was, at that time, a family-owned paper, a really nice place to be. I got to do a lot of in-depth stories about, like, Asbury Park. I did a whole series on juvenile justice. As a matter of fact, when I interviewed at the Daily News, I'll never forget this, I brought, you know, a portfolio with all of my long project stories, and the editor's like, yeah, you're never going to do this here. You know what I mean? Like, kind of, not in a bad way, just like, you know. So it was a chance to do some really long-form journalism, learn about new areas that, again, I had not grown up going to the Jersey Shore, so that was cool, you know. What other kind of things? Again, I spent a lot of that in Trenton, so I got to travel around with Christy Whitman. I have to, like, do Cliff Notes of my life sometimes because I can't remember a lot of things. I was lucky there weren't any storms the year that I lived at the shore, but there were constant drownings. I lived at Bradley Beach, and It was a very, very hot summer, and I mean, every day it was awful. That was tough, and you'll see that in the New York City and Long Island beaches too.
Sure. All right. Any major setbacks while you pursued your career?
That's a really interesting question.
You must have. I think we've shared stories of, like, you know, being rejected for an internship or a job that you really wanted, but maybe something better came up, or you know, a position within the organization, and maybe there was a chance to become an editor somewhere, but then you.
No, I always turned down. The Daily News wanted to make me an editor like twice, and I never won. I mean, I had a bad situation. I mean, once I got on a roll, right? I had job after job after job, and I steadily went from one job to the other. I think when I got to the Asbury Park Press, I knew pretty soon I wanted to work in the State House, so I was able to do that in about a year and a half, which was good. I have to be careful how I say this. When Gannett bought over the Daily News, the Asbury Park Press in the late 90s, they brought in, I had a wonderful editor, bureau chief, amazing. They kind of pushed him aside and brought somebody else in who was awful. And he was somebody who was really this very respected investigative reporter, an older guy, knew nothing about, like, Trenton politics, State House, didn't know any of that. And we just clashed. It was awful. He just didn't, he's like, you're more like an AP reporter. Like, I don't know what he wants. And, like, that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. We did not, that was one of the toughest times. We did not get along at all. And then finally, I ended up moving back to the Asbury Park Press main office, and not, because it was no longer an Asbury Park Press Trenton bureau anymore. They made it a Gannett Trenton bureau. It was weird. So I wasn't even working for my editor. So it just mutually agreed. I went back to the Asbury Park Press, and I became a state education reporter. And I got to work with my old editor again. So it was the greatest thing in the world. I mean, I had to commute to Neptune, but it was worth it, from Lambertville, New Jersey, but it was worth it. I got to, and I remember my friends at the State House, like, you're lucky you get to work with so-and-so again. That was trying. I mean, I don't even know how I would have handled it any better, because he really was a jerk. And, you know, and everybody was like, oh, but he's so respected. I'm like, being like this respected person who's been working by himself doesn't mean that you can come in and manage people and manage a staff when you don't know the issues. So that was awful. But I mean, it didn't ruin anything. It just
It was a tough time.
yeah, it was a tough time. But I found, because the Asbury Park Press was such a good place, you know, I was able to find and just go to another position, work with my old State House editor again, who was wonderful, and then covered state education for a few months. And that was at the end of my career there anyway. I was heading over to the Daily News half a year later. So
that wasn't too bad for your career, definitely. If you could, this is always a fun one. If you could pick one person, dead or alive, to interview,
no.
who would it be?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm so bad at these. I mean, it's like somebody that
The members of Rush.
right? I mean, maybe, I don't think anybody here would even know Grace Slick from the Jefferson Airplane was my idol when I was a little kid. But who, you know, I think you're probably thinking of like a weighty person, like somebody not in the entertainment field. I'll have to think about that.
How about when you were covering politics, was there anyone who you wish you had an opportunity to interview?
No, I mean, I feel like we could, no, not really. I mean, who would you want to interview if you could? I mean, I once interviewed somebody I really was a big fan of. I guess I shouldn't name names. He was kind of a jerk on the phone. Like, I was a huge fan of this artist in the late 80s. And it wasn't bad, but it wasn't the greatest phone interview. So that's why I'm a little like, it's almost worse if you meet somebody that you really are a fan of and they're not great. So
Yeah, that can ruin things. The most challenging story for you from John? What was the most challenging story you ever reported on?
I don't know. I mean, do you have any?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about covering something like September 11th, natural disasters like hurricanes. Didn't you go to, was it Haiti at one point, or?
Oh, but that was following the mayor, you know what I mean? So that was sort of, that was a very controlled, like you couldn't really go out on your own in Haiti. And that was in 2004, I think. I mean, the thing about September 11th, again, I was like a political reporter at that time. I mean, I think the people who had to constantly like go with the family, you know, go talk to the families and cover that, that must have been really hard. I mean, again, going down there and talking to people, but I was mostly, you know, covering the City Hall angle of that. Ooh, hard. I mean, anytime, you know what I really don't like, and this is just me, like Man on the Street. After all of these years, I'm still really, I don't like going up to people.
Your
Oh,
microphone.
I'm sorry. Oh, great. Sorry about that. I think Man on the Street is still a little awkward for me sometimes, unless it's like you're at a crime or something very, you know, an event. Just randomly going up to people, that's hard, and you'll have to do that a lot, especially when you're starting out. But some people really don't mind it. I find that difficult. I'm going to have to do some research into my own career. I think sometimes I can't remember everything.
Well, from Joel, since we haven't gotten him in yet, who specifically or which cast are you most looking forward to covering at Comic-Con?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so Gotham and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I spent all yesterday, and again, I've been a hard news reporter most of my life, so this is like really new to me. But ever since I got on the Comic-Con list, I get like 15 emails a day. Cover this panel, come cover this panel. But the two I really wanted, I covered S.H.I.E.L.D. last year, S.H.I.E.L.D. and Gotham, and I finally got that like nailed down yesterday. And I'm also going to get to do the press room for Orville for Seth MacFarlane, so hopefully that'll be good too. So you get to do a press, you know, where you do these crazy round tables where they kind of jump from table to table with reporters, and then you cover a panel which the fans can go to, where sometimes they're even more loose and fun at the panels. So those are definitely the two that I really want to do.
Nice rewards of being a reporter.
I know.
I think let's see, Jessica said you covered topics ranging from local politics to animal-related issues. Are you assigned to those topics, or did you choose them?
It's a combination. I think there's ways to find out, and you're definitely a good example of this. There's ways to find, if you're interested in something, like I was always interested in animal issues. I'm interested, you know, but anyway, so say when I was at the North Jersey Herald News and I had to cover certain towns, you know, I would just find ways, whether it was like doing stories through the animal control officer, or when I worked in New York City Hall covering the New York City Department of Health, which oversees animal control. So there's always ways to kind of cover what you want and what you're assigned to. And sometimes, you know, that's what I feel like. I feel like most of what I do now, I get to kind of choose, which is awesome. Sometimes you just get assigned and you just have to do what you do. But everywhere I've worked, I've been able to do both, you know, to find ways within whatever your beat structure is to do something that you're interested in. Like you're very interested in history, so you were able to do a lot while we were in Queens on that.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I tell students a lot is that you don't want to be assigned to these stories that you don't care anything about. And
I mean, sometimes you'll have to. There's no...
Right. I mean, you can't avoid it all the time, but if you just show up and you never have ideas, they'll just assign you to things that you really do not want to cover. But if you just come all the time and you have 5 or 6 ideas, and I tried to do that at the Daily News, then eventually you just have a full slate of stories, so they can't assign you to anything else, and the reporters who are less ambitious maybe or less creative in what they're reporting to get saddled with some of the...
But that was also the beauty of having the bureau, because if you were in the main office, you know, depending on where you are, you'd be going to every breaking news story every day. So it's also where you are in a news organization, what your assignment is. And I think people would sort of wrongly look down on the bureaus all the time. And we used to laugh because we knew it was the better place to be. And I had been at both. I had been in the main office and in City Hall and in the bureau. And we had a lot of flexibility and a much better, you know, situation. So
Sure. So we should wind down, but we can have a few more questions in here. Let's see.
tell me.
Elise asks, which publication was your favorite to write for?
Oh, I have to say where I am now, right?
AM New York is watching.
I have to say.
There's like one guy in the back from AM New York. Say AM New York.
I know. I'm having to, look, I grew up reading the Daily News, so working at the Daily News was something I had always wanted to do my whole life, and I did it for 18 years. And I really loved it and enjoyed it. A lot of the people I work with now at AM New York Newsday are former Daily News reporters, a lot of them. So we always kind of joke that we're doing at AM New York Newsday what we were doing at the Daily News 20 years ago, that same kind of New York City-centric news feature, breaking, journalism and stuff. So at every place I've worked, I've enjoyed, there's up times and down times. But obviously, I'm happy where I am now, too.
Sure. So we have Maria Zuniga, who's our vice president of SPJ, says, do you think social media is selective on the news they expose their consumers to versus legacy outlets like the New York Times? So it's more selective.
It's really up to, if I'm not understanding the question, let me know. It's up to who you follow, right?
Like they usually have trending on Twitter.
Trending, sure.
Do they expose basically what they want us to know instead of the New York Times that is more all news related?
I don't know how they come up with trending. Sometimes you'll see trending for you, which you'll see what's trending in your Twitter feed of the people you follow. And then obviously that there's people who have sponsored Twitter accounts. So that adds to a lot of it. But I don't know. I think the best thing that you could do is follow as many organizations as you can and then organize it through your tweet deck. So you have everything in there. You have CNN, the New York Times, the New Jersey papers, put them all in one. So you can control what you see on Twitter to some account. It's just a matter of, I don't know how they figure out the trending otherwise. I'm not really sure about that.
I always sense that it was the accounts that I follow. I tend to get a lot of Twitter
it'll
moments.
say trending for you, and that'll be yours,
Right.
but then there'll be the larger trending on Twitter.
But since I follow a lot of political accounts, I tend to get that. It's all politics, Mets, Islanders, and Taylor Swift in my feed all the time about the news that happens.
So wrong.
Don't diss Taylor.
So scary.
But okay, this is a really good one probably from our chairman, Dr. Rob Quick, who's probably using the College Radio Day account right now. He says, what's the biggest or the best piece of advice you've ever been given? That's a really nice one.
Ooh, that is a really good one. I can't nail it down to what, one person has told me. I think it's just sort of, be prepared, do your research. One person, one editor I really respect said to me once, you'll always be okay, you're a journeyman. And I didn't really understand what that meant. I did and I didn't. And it meant like, there's stars in newsrooms and they usually fall sometimes eventually, as we were talking about before. Just slow and steady. Just, there's a lot of pressure to, promote yourself. You're going to want the editors to love you. You're going to want to have the big breaking stories. It'll come to you, but you want to be a solid reporter more than anything else. You want people to respect you. You want your work to stand up. So, while they may be, applauding somebody else who got like the big quote of the day, that person, 2 years from now won't matter. But if you're always seen as a solid reporter, that'll stick with you. Nothing's more important than your reputation, and that will kind of keep you going. So
yeah, I was thinking about this for myself, and our bureau chief in Queens, Paul Shin, who has spoken to my classes here and now works for ABC News, was always really good with different pieces of sage advice. One of the things they told me that I always tell students in this part of the country is you want to stay here. He used to joke with me that I was Peter Parker, like Spider-Man, because I was from Forest Hills, Queens. This is where Peter Parker is in the comic books from. And then I was a journalist, like Peter Parker is a photojournalist. So I had everything except the Mary Jane. But in those situations, he was saying, you want to get out of your bubble, because if you live your entire time in New York City or in New Jersey, and we have a certain way of viewing the world here, and I know you talked about going to Pennsylvania. For me, I went to Ohio for my PhD, and you see a whole other world of the way people view it, and So a lot of times when you question the way that people are viewing politics, let's say, or gun control, or all these sorts of things, and then you go to another part of the country, you understand it a little bit more. So maybe getting out of your comfort zone and going, there's nothing, you can travel, but nothing really beats living in a whole other part of the country.
I mentioned this earlier. When I left Queens and moved to Bergen County, which we know some people call the sixth borough, right? I had friends over there that you would have think, I like dropped off the face of the earth. Oh my God, like you're crossing the Hudson. Like it's ridiculous. It's laughable now. And that was sort of a tough move. And now because then I just kept going further west and further west. But I never went further west than King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. It was the best thing. I met different people. I learned how to cover municipal government from the ground up. I lived different places. It is a lot of the young reporters, and this is what you were referring to, when they wanted to leave, they weren't staff writers, they were permalancers, which you'll find a lot of that full-time freelancers. And Paul would tell them, do what we did. He also, look in New Jersey, look in Pennsylvania, look wherever. And they did not want to leave New York. And I get it, but, you've got to grow, you've got to learn, you've got to go somewhere where you can get hired and write and learn and do, and not everything is going to be in the same place.
Right. So I think it's good to close with the best piece of advice.
Oh, thank you. Those were great questions. I'm sorry if I fumpered on some, but they were really good questions, so I appreciate it.
There's still more up there, but yeah, maybe we can tweet them later. But so just before we go, a few things. First of all,
well, what advice?
Oh wait, isn't that the one you just?
Oh,
asked?
was it?
What
Well, no,
advice
that
did you
was
give?
advice that
journalists
you'd
who are about to
gotten.
graduate. Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I would say. Whether you want to go into TV, radio, print, web, it's all kind of coming together now. So I think it's really important for young people, obviously, be very comfortable on social media. Also, watch your social media. Okay, I know it's hard because you sort of grew up being very open in it with your friends, but now you're going to be applying for jobs and people are going to look at those, and they will. But really try to learn how to, and you may be doing this on your own anyway, photos, videos, all of that. You need to have all of those skills. A lot of the young reporters say at DNA Info or some of those places, they take their own photos, they do their own video. Even at Newsdays gives us phones, and they want us to do more video with our phones, even though we have a whole staff of photographers. Be prepared with like all of those skills. While you're in school, try to do whatever internships you can to expose yourself to what's out there. I think that's really important. And read. That's the most important thing of all. Read newspapers, magazines, books. Just consume everything, and that's how you're really going to learn and see what's out there. Those, I think, are really important. Work on those skills, read. Be open to all of that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you.